coffee, tea, and rum. One day when the tonguing is done, take our leave and go. At a fair in the sun of town, her hair was blonde and this was brown. She made a whaler man come around.
In July of this year, 2023, I had traveled to northern Indiana to buy this 1960 Oday Osprey, which is a 16-foot Daysailer sloop-rigged. The boat was in good condition for its age, but I knew she was going to need a little work to get her in sailing condition. I'm not a collector, and I really have no interest in a thorough restoration to factory condition. What I am interested in is going sailing in a really cool vintage boat, and I think these old Odays just really fit my needs the best. There's not a modern design that's really comparable in my opinion. So the plan was to get everything mechanically sound, do a little refit and a bit of cosmetic sprucing up along the way, and go sailing. I would not be spending a whole lot of time trying to make the boat perfect because I intend to use it. Stripped everything out, all the hardware and floorboards, and I got it sanded down, got the bilge sanded down and the inside of the hull and cleaned up. I hit it with a couple of coats of flat white primer, and I think flat is the way to go because a gloss finish on the interior of a boat is going to really show dirt and imperfections. The original paint or coating is actually some kind of a non-slip coating that Oday uses, and I think my Mariner has the same thing. I really don't enjoy painting, so I used a roller to get the most coverage possible and just save some time. And it was not fun getting way up into the cuddy cabin all cramped up trying to paint in there, but to me it is worth it because it just makes the boat feel a lot fresher. I considered several options for restoring the gel coat. I decided before trying expensive paints or polishing compounds, why not just get it cleaned up as good as I could and see how it looks. I had heard that household bleach is actually very effective at cleaning fiberglass boats, especially old stained gel coat, so I thought I would give it a try. I was just using a bleach and cleaner solution that was pre-mixed in a spray bottle. The results actually turned out to be pretty stunning. I was honestly shocked. A lot of what I thought was permanent staining and oxidation was easily removed by a few applications of bleach, and you really don't have to do a lot of scrubbing. The bleach does most of the work at dissolving organic compounds. I learned from the previous owner that this Osprey had been on a lift and flipped over in a big windstorm, and so the mast was bent, and it seemed to me that it had also suffered a little bit of damage at the deck hull joint. It had a little bit of a small chunk out of that joint and was also separating there. And I looked over the entirety of the joint, and I think that's the only place where it's separating, and that must have been started by that damage. There are any number of complicated solutions to this problem, but I think all that's really needed is application of 5200 and clamping the joint together. The hardest part of this job was actually replacing the vinyl rub rail. I found that a set of inner tube levers for a bicycle tire actually do the trick nicely. The transom has a section that is reinforced with plywood that's glassed in right at the rudder gudgeons, and the lower portion of this had some rot. If you really wanted to do it the right way, the plywood should be totally cut out and removed and replaced and a new piece glassed in. Well, perhaps later in the boat's life I may get around to doing that the right way, but I'm trying to go sailing this summer. So my solution, cut out the rot, add in basically a little spacer square of plywood, and then I'm going to sister in 3/8 marine plywood over that. And I think that'll do the job for quite a while actually. The coaming boards and floorboards I believe are teak wood, and the coaming boards are in pretty good condition. They really just needed to be sanded down and stained. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of rot where two boards meet in the corner of the cockpit, and I really don't know what to do about that, because if I cut it out, it just isn't going to look right, and the coamings are mainly for appearance. They do help to keep a little bit of water out of the cockpit if it should happen to roll up on the deck. I've always been curious about this Cabot Australian timber oil, and I'm using a mahogany color which seems to match very closely the stain that was previously used. The floorboards were actually in pretty rough condition, with several boards being broken in half, cracked, split, and desperately needing some kind of a stain or finish. To be honest, I was really afraid that I might just have to throw out the old boards and fabricate new ones, which wouldn't be a big deal, but I don't think I would want to spring for the cost of teak. Each board would be like $60 to $80 from what I had looked at. I decided to try using butt blocks to join some of the broken boards, and it ended up working pretty nicely actually. I know these floorboards aren't going to last forever, but I should definitely get some use out of them, and they ended up looking pretty nice in the end. The timbers that support the floorboards were in pretty poor state, and it seemed that a lot were missing, so it was kind of a tedious process to recreate some of those frames and actually have to build new ones, which involved a lot of guesswork. It seemed that was part of the reason that a lot of the boards had broken, was a lack of support underneath, so I ended up using quite a lot of frames to keep those boards supported. I basically created all my new frames using some of the existing timbers that were close enough to different sections of the hull, because that is the trick. You kind of have to match the slight contour of the bottom of the hull to the frames. So it just took a lot of shuffling around and guessing and cutting and recutting and just trial and error. I used 3/4 Douglas fir decking for the material of the frames, which is treated I think with copper, so that'll give it some rot resistance, and it's also a pretty substantial wood, good structural lumber. I decided to paint the frames white just to kind of blend in with the bilge so that you wouldn't notice them so much. The mast was actually bent in two places, near the middle and near the bottom where it passes through the deck. And so I watched a video on YouTube of how to straighten a sailboat's aluminum mast, and that's more or less the method I used. You take a couple of sawhorses, put the bend directly in the middle of the two horses, and then just kind of bounce it slowly, bounce it up and down at the bend. Do a little bit and turn the mast over and check it to see if you've made any progress, and I just did that very slowly, and that straightened it out quite easily. There's a small composite or plastic block that is used to fasten the mast jack to the keelson, and for whatever reason mine was split and cracked totally in half, so I fabricated a new one out of aluminum stock. A drill press is really nice to have for that kind of work. The standing rigging was in very poor condition, so I ended up having to take measurements, and from that, Rudy at D&R Marine was able to fabricate new stays. And the rigging is even upgraded now because Rudy informed me that he uses turnbuckles in all of his rigging, and the original Osprey rigging didn't have any turnbuckles or any form of adjustment other than the mast jack. From DNR Marine, I also purchased a set of stainless steel pintles and gudgeons and a mast tabernacle to make raising and lowering the mast about 100 times easier than trying to step the keel step. Installing the tabernacle was a little bit nerve-wracking. You do have to cut your mast and remove, I think, 1.5 inches. My dad has been in the tool and die business for many years. He has a lot of experience working with aluminum in different forms. So I asked him what he thought the best way to cut the mast would be, and somewhat surprisingly, he said just use a chop saw and go really slow. Aluminum is of course a very soft metal, so actually not that hard to cut at all. There is no tabernacle made specifically for the Osprey, but I sent Rudy a picture of my mast extrusion and he recognized immediately that it was the same one used in the Javelin. It was a pretty tight fit and I had to gently tap either side of the tabernacle into the mast using a mallet, and then once it's in, you secure it with 3 ×20 screws on each half. Raising of the mast is extremely easy. I ordered 200 feet of this 1/4 inch braid from Duckworks, and it was more affordable braid, not the most expensive at all, but it seems to be good quality line. That's what I'm going to use on all my sheets and halyards on this boat. There could be something to be said for having different colors for different lines, but I really don't find it to be a problem, and I just think it looks nicer. I have no intention of fitting a motor on this boat, so I will be fitting a set of oar locks and sockets. I used Douglas fir for the risers, and I ended up making some mistakes here, but they look all right and they function okay, and they're definitely going to get me through the summer. The oars are really only to be used in an absolute flat calm, just something to get you home a little bit more easily than a paddle. The rudder had a lot of crazing and cracking to the gel coat, and I really didn't have the patience to do what was needed to fill all those cracks and make them perfect, so I sanded it down the best I could, used a heavy filling primer and a few coats of paint, and yeah, you can still see some cracks if you look at it up close, but it looks a whole lot fresher than it did, and it'll be easier to clean with that gloss paint on it. Originally, I was expecting to be trailering this boat, which is why I wanted to install that tabernacle, but as the build was ongoing, I happened upon an opportunity to cheaply, that being the key word, cheaply be able to keep the boat in the water at a private dock on Kentucky Lake, and I couldn't turn down the opportunity, so I decided might want to get a coat of bottom paint on there. These kinds of little projects always end up taking a lot more time and work than I think that they're going to. And I've done so many by now, I should know better, but I don't. It took maybe 2.5 weeks of afternoons working really hard to get the restoration and refit to its completed state, or at least completed for this season. And I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, and I think the boat is fit for the water and looking a whole lot fresher than when I first got it.